Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the Whitetail Woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light, go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson. And today I'm speaking with Dan Johnson about out-of-state hunt planning and the future of non-resident hunting.
Hello, my friends. Mark Kenyon here again, just jumping in for a quick update before another episode here with Mr. Tony Peterson, but wanted to remind you that this coming weekend, if you're listening in real time, on March 26th, 2023, I'm kicking off my first event for the Working for Wildlife Tour. I'm going to be out on the ground outside of Massachusetts, or outside of Boston, Massachusetts, working on a massive trash cleanup on the Martin Burns Wildlife Management area. If you're listening in time for this on Thursday, the day this podcast comes out, you can still register to participate in that event. You can get all the details over at the Meat Eater website. If you search for the Working for Wildlife Tour, you'll find the link there to register. We're giving away 25 of these sweet new I Work for Wildlife t-shirts that I helped design. I want to meet you, I want to shake your hand, want to hear your stories, and I want to pick up a bunch of trash and clean this place up so that future generations can enjoy these places. Heck, so that current generations can enjoy this place next week. And we've got a whole bunch of these kinds of events continuing throughout the year. The second one is on April 22nd up in Kalkaska, Michigan, with collaboration from the Michigan United Conservation Clubs. And we're going to be doing some brush pile creation, some different cool stuff on the ground, improving that habitat. So, all that said, there are some other great events happening this weekend that I wanted to bring to your attention. In the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers website over on the event page, you can see that there's a whole bunch of stuff happening. March 25th, this coming Saturday, is a WMA habitat improvement project in Fairfield, Vermont. There is a tire cleanup going on March 25th in Perryville, Arkansas. There is a Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Trash and Trout Day in Greenbrier Ranger District over in Bartow, West Virginia. That's all this coming weekend. There's all sorts of stuff like coming up. I want to mention another one, April 15th down in Indiana. There's an event being put on by some of my buddies at BHA. Going to do some other great habitat work in the southern part of Indiana. Point is, if you care about these places, if you care about wild critters, public lands, public waters, one of the best things we can do to get out there and help these places out is be on the ground doing real things. It's one thing to worry about this stuff. It's one thing about sending an email, placing a phone call. That's all good. It's all important. But I think sometimes actually getting your hands dirty, giving back to these places, seeing these places in person, I think is a great way to kind of refill the reservoir, kind of recharge you personally, get you connected to these places that we're trying to keep around. And it does some real tangible good for the deer, for the turkeys, for the fish, for the birds, whatever it is. We can make a difference. That's what this Working for Wildlife Tour is all about. I really hope to see you at this event this coming weekend in Massachusetts or next month in Michigan, wherever it might be. Again, full details over at the Meat Eater website. That's themeateater.com. Go to the search bar, search for Working for Wildlife Tour. You get the full scoop. You can sign up. I really hope to see you there.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, which is brought to you by First Light. You guessed it, this is not Mark Kenyon's voice, it's Tony. Mark is, well, let's be honest here. Mark is on vacation again. I don't even want to talk about it since I'm stuck here keeping the lights on while he's off eating caviar and fly fishing exotic species of South American fish while rubbing elbows with the Kardashians or something. Who knows what that lucky fella is spending his book royalties on this week. Anywhooski, today I've got an old Wired to Hunt favorite on, Dan Johnson. Dan is the host of the Nine Fingers Chronicles podcast, the owner of the Sportsman Empire network of outdoor podcasts, and a die-hard whitetail hunter. And even though he lives in Iowa, Dan travels every year out of state to hunt deer and other critters, which is what this episode is all about. So we start out with kind of a doom and gloom festival on the future of hunting, but eventually get into the realities of planning an out-of-state hunt where we cover the logistics and what it really takes to have a great hunt no matter where you travel. And I'll say this, whether you travel to hunt or not, you're going to want to give this one a listen because it's going to be worth it. I promise you that. Dan, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Yourself?
I'm good, but we just off air here got into a little conversation that's not all rosy about the future of hunting. And this episode, I want to get you on to talk about planning hunts and how do you decide where you're going to go on your whitetail hunts and all that good stuff. But we got to talk about a few things that proposed legislation out there in a few different states. And you were just telling me Iowa has some stuff that might go through that sounds pretty freaking wild. What's going on down there, man?
So the first thing I want to do is preface this conversation that we are about to have. And I want to step into the shoes for a second of the Michigan hunter, of the Pennsylvania hunter, of the New York hunter, for a moment, because in the Nine Finger Chronicles podcast, and when I used to host the co-host the Wired to Hunt podcast, I had the ability to talk with hundreds, if not thousands by now, of people all over the country about their how they hunt. And so places like Michigan, 9 guys probably out of every 10 would say, dude, Michigan hunting sucks, or Pennsylvania hunting sucks, or, it's so high pressure and there's so many deer that get shot every year and there's multiple tags and the rifle season is during the rut. And so all these negative things that I hear, and it's consistent, and it has been consistent since 2014 when I started doing all this stuff. And so there's a common theme here that is starting to snowball into other states. And now I'll get into that Iowa topic, where everybody knows Iowa as the mecca of what like big mature whitetail hunting can be. And not only from just we have the habitat in the southern half of the state. It's really the rules and regulations that keep Iowa great. And now some of this proposed legislation is only going to take away from that. And really it's going to destroy everything that we currently have, that top age structure. All of these bills are designed to take away from what makes Iowa great. And it's all about money and politics. And it's unfortunate that that's how the decisions are being made.
So you're painting a pretty bleak picture. What's going on here?
Yeah. Okay. So first things first, and I'll start with one topic that is somewhat controversial, actually 2 topics. The first one is as of right now, non-resident landowners still have to go through the draw system like every other hunter, right? Just because you own land doesn't mean that you're and live in another state doesn't mean that you automatically get your archery tag every year. You have to apply for it. You have to wait, 3, 4, whatever zone you're in. That zone has an amount of like preference points, so to speak, just like Wyoming does. And so certain states or certain zones, like in the southern half of the state, it's a hot commodity. So some guys are waiting 4 years to 5 years in order to hunt the farm that they own. And so there's a new, it's not new because they try to do it almost every year, every other year, and it continues to get shot down. And that law would be landowners have the ability to hunt every year, right? And that sounds like a good thing for non-resident landowners, but because Iowa is only 2% public land, because like 80% to 90% of the cover, and what I mean by cover is like CRP and timber is south of Interstate 80 in Iowa. We have this gigantic flood of people coming into it, residents and non-residents, every year. And so you open that up, what that is going to do, the state of Iowa is in a population decline anyway. So people are moving out of the state of Iowa. And that means that the current landowners will then sell that to a non-resident hunter. And it will, one bad thing is that it will displace hunters. They have nowhere to go. And so then public becomes even more crowded than it already is. And I know a lot of people are listening to this and saying, hey, woe is me. Listen to Dan, who's an Iowa resident, gets to hunt Iowa every year, complain about the situation that he has. I'm not complaining about the situation that I have. I'm complaining about the situation that will be if all of this passes. Talk to anybody in Western Illinois in that Pike County who is a resident and ask them what hunting was like 20 years ago when the big buck craze hit Western Illinois and every piece of property in some of these counties is either outfitted, it became leased, or a non-resident landowner purchased it and displaced all these other hunters.
So explain this to me. Hold on a second. So
yep.
I know that Iowa has historically limited non-resident licenses to like 6,000 a year, I think, right? And
right.
Each zone is allotted, some of the northern zones without a lot of cover, there might be like 35 non-resident tags total, or
right.
archery tags or whatever. And then the southern zones, there'll be more. Are they proposing that 6,000 cap is that's different than these non-resident tags? I mean, are they increasing, proposing
essentially, if you're a landowner, you get your landowner's tag every year. You don't get your state tag because a resident landowner in Iowa can not only get their landowner's tag, but then they can also get their statewide archery tag.
Yep.
So this would just allow landowners to get a tag every single year.
Okay. And then you said that there's the potential to sell those tags, kind of like a New Mexico elk landowner voucher. That's in the proposal too.
Yeah. So I just found this out 2 days ago. There is some new legislation out there. So in Iowa, in order to get a landowner's tag, you only need 4 acres of ground. And as of right now, there are some new proposals going out to where Iowa landowners, maybe they don't hunt, but if you own that 4 acres and you qualify for a tag, then you will be able to get that tag and you will be able to sell it to anybody you want, any non-resident, any resident that you want to. So potentially this could mean, hey, I could buy, they're going to go up for bid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And potentially a guy could buy a tag on 4 acres. A guy could, a landowner could sell his Iowa tag for, 3, 4, 5, however many thousands of dollars that the highest bidder wants to, because there's definitely a commodity for it. It would allow them to sell the tags to whoever they wanted to, and then that person could come in and hunt.
So who does this come from? Because if you're sitting there at the Iowa DNR and you've got this kind of monopoly on these tags and this highly sought after trophy experience, and they've proven that they're going to raise prices and kind of play that Western looking game a little bit with the resource. Why would the DNR be for this? Like, why would they want to devalue that experience and dilute that pool of tags? Right. Or does this come from somebody else?
This isn't coming from the DNR.
This is coming from the legislature.
This is legislation and politicians.
Got it.
That are proposing bills. Now, the next one gets a little even more tricky, right? And this tells you how dirty everything is starting to get in this space and in this world, right? So now we have this natural resource that just imagine adding all of those people to the state of Iowa, whether you have 4 acres or whether you have 4,000 acres. You're adding all these additional tags. Let's not get it twisted. Hunting in Iowa is easier than hunting in Michigan. I'll be the first to agree with that, right? Especially with the rules and regulations where, dude, you can rattle in a 3-year-old in Iowa like that if you're patient and you're on the right farm. It's not hard to do, right? Yep. And so we have this older age structure that is very sought after. Older age structure means bigger antlers, which makes them even more sought after. You add all of these non-resident landowners, you add all of these non-resident tags, you're just going to, so imagine a guy who gets an Iowa tag. He comes from a state or a location where a 130 class 3-year-old would be a gigantic deal for him. So what are these people going to do? They're going to go in, they're going to go, oh my God, this is the biggest buck I've ever seen. And I don't blame them. And they shoot it, right? The next guy does the same thing. The next guy does the same thing. So all of a sudden you have the top tier age structure just completely wiped out in a handful of years. And now we're no different than in any of these other states.
I think that that's possible. I think that it's easy to sort of, pin this on, what I would have to see to play devil's advocate here is how many people this is. How many tags is this? Because if you're talking about, if this goes through the way it could, and you're talking $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 non-resident tags, you're talking about somebody who's probably not necessarily hunting 130s, but I guess it kind of depends how the market bears out and what the tags would cost and how many people are actually involved in this. And and I say that so this is like this is just like a little warning. And people listening to this go, well, I was never going to hunt Iowa anyway because I'm not going to spend $700 on a deer tag. That's not really the point. This is sort of an echo from other states and other strategies. And the gist of the whole thing is we're not really staring at a brighter future if you're a whitetail hunter in an awful lot of situations. And so you might be thinking, I know you like to hunt South Dakota. I've hunted South Dakota a whole bunch. We were just talking, before this about how there's a proposal there from the Game and Fish. I think it's from the Game and Fish to limit non-resident any deer tags to 2,200 for the entire year. And there's going to be a lottery, or that's built into the proposal anyway, which to me says, okay, we're probably going to be playing the points game there, sort of like Wyoming, and it's another revenue generator and agree with it, disagree with it, whatever. It's another potential lost opportunity for an awful lot of hunters. And that trend is happening all over the place. And so, we're going to talk, we'll get a little rosier here in a second. But if you're paying attention out there, and Nebraska just did this with limiting non-resident deer hunters and turkey hunters, this stuff's coming to everybody. Like it just is. And if you're interested in going out and hunting across state lines, like I'd start thinking about it now, because this is a slippery slope type of thing. And I get why people are for some of these proposals, and I get why if you're a resident of a certain state, you don't want anybody else coming in. But at the same time, you're advocating the loss of hunting opportunities from your fellow hunters. And the more we do that, the worse this thing gets. And so it's not just it's easy to be like, oh, hey, I don't want anybody coming here to hunt the public land that I like to hunt on. It's like, yeah, obviously. But there's repercussions for that mentality, and we're all going to deal with them across the entire whitetail world here. And I mean, we already are. Right.
The thing that impacts Iowa, I feel, the most compared to a state like South Dakota. I mean, you've been to South Dakota and how much public land there is available to hunt. I mean, it is ridiculous. Other things go into that equation, like grazing. And, just because it's public doesn't mean it holds deer, right? But in Iowa, there is less than 2% of the total surface area in Iowa is public hunting ground. And so there's nowhere really for the locals to go if they're displaced by some of these laws.
So this is a great thing to talk about, and it's something – we see the whole fight between Matt Ranella and Steve, and Matt doesn't want any more hunters out there. And a lot of people say we don't need them out there because everything's too crowded already. And I look at it and I go, we don't have, I feel like not recruiting is a bad idea. Like, I think we need people coming into our ranks. And so I look at that and I go, okay, if you're Iowa, and I've said this about South Dakota, I've said this about a lot of states. If you're Iowa and you're looking at something like that and you're staring down the barrel of 98% of your land is private, how do we get more public then? We never talk about this. I mean, do you build in an extra $10 per preference point and use that to fund a walk-in program or something? Like, we're facing this everywhere. Like, and I think like the best thing we can do for so many of these situations in these states is figure out how to get more land open to everyone.
Yeah. Yep. And that's hard to do, and especially in a state like Iowa, where the main focus is depending on where you're at, the main focus is not the natural resource, right? Just look what happened with the pheasant population in this state. They farmed up to the fences on absolutely everything. They tore out buffer strips so they could farm an extra 2 rows of corn or, ag ground, right? And so the main focus in this state is still and always has been agriculture.
Yep.
And so unless you can get the current landowners on board, probably the only way you're going to do that is some kind of financial reward. Then I like it will be very tough, especially when you can use that ground to plant more corn or plant more, or have more cattle or put up a hog confinement or whatever people do to make money in the ag world.
Yep. Well, I mean, we've seen this in Minnesota has it, South Dakota has it, Kansas has it, Western states have it. There are walk-in access programs that pay landowners. And I kind of feel like that format is something we really need to pay attention to because, so you think about that, you've got, an ag heavy state like Iowa and a whole bunch of the flyover states in the Midwest. There are a lot of farmers out there where if you were like, hey, $3 an acre, $5 an acre, whatever, enroll your farm, they're going to do it. Like they're going to do it because they can still make their money on it. And, those programs tend to have pretty good liability insurance and things like that. So the landowner's off the hook if you go out there and blow your head off or whatever. Like, I think we need to get serious about that. And what you were talking about with Iowa and being able to sell landowner tags is the exact opposite, because that is going to lock up land in a way that is going to be really rough for everyone. And this kind of stuff, it scares me because it's getting so difficult out there. And what I worry about is sort of like, I want to just get mine mentality and giving up on states. Like, I know that I've hunted quite a few different states in my life, and some of them I just have a hard time caring about anymore because it's like there's no opportunity for me there. It's hard for me to muster up a whole lot of, rah, let's fight for your hunting opportunities when it doesn't matter to me. And I know that sounds shitty, but it's like, I don't want to see that happen on a large scale where we're super apathetic and we don't care about our hunters who are across state lines because we've been screwed so many times by license prices and cuts and opportunities. And I just don't want to see us get more divided. And I can feel myself sort of just like, I don't give a shit about some of this stuff anymore. And I don't like that.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, man, that's where it gets muddy and it gets gross and like greedy. And it becomes, there's groups of people out there that are trying to treat our natural resources like commodities and not like the natural resource that needs to be delicately managed, right? They're out there going, well, the land is going to produce more deer. So, just like cattle prices are this, and the next thing you know, they're going to have futures and on tag sales and things like that. Well, look, I mean, it can go whatever way you can imagine it. It could possibly go that way. And so like right now, there's large groups of people in the state of Iowa who are rallying together to let politicians know, do not change this, right? Do not change these laws. We want them the same. keep them the same. We don't care if non-residents come in, but put them in line, just like every state. And I'm going to say this, and I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, but I really do feel like all states should manage their natural resources with the residents in mind first, and then worry about the non-resident. I know that may seem unfavorable because there could be a potential law change that could keep me out of a state as much as I want to do. I feel like non-residents in all situations have their say in some of this, but it's the people who are paying the taxes on an annual basis in their state should have a little bit more of a voice on rules and regulations than someone who doesn't even live here.
So I looked into that because that's a very common argument to make. I looked into it to Wyoming because Wyoming pisses me off so much sometimes. And if you look at, and this is the case with Wyoming, I'm not saying this is any other state, but if you look at the amount of federal tax that Wyoming contributes to the federal dowry and then how much they take out, the ratio isn't even close. They rank like 49th. So they're putting in a little bit and taking out a lot. And so if I'm a federal taxpayer from some other state, which I am, where does that leave me? You know what I mean? So this is it's not so simple.
I definitely think that. I agree with that because there's a lot of federal public land in states like Wyoming. But it's not about
federal public land. It's about, if you say, okay, we pay the taxes in this state. Well, federal taxes are building roads for you. They're doing all kinds of programs. It's not just a natural resource thing. And I look at that and I go, I get it. I get the argument. But if you're traveling to hunt, you're all paying enough taxes. Like, we're all reaping the benefits of federal taxes and we're paying them. And it's not so cut and dry that it's just the state residents who are funding everything. And then you look at the non-resident revenue that's coming in some of those states and how much money they're generating off of that. It's like not so simple, you know? And I get the argument. Right.
I just feel like, and maybe I'm a little jaded because I've been through this before where, and kudos to the family for making their money and, putting the land up for auction. But I would say over my lifetime, I have lost permission hunting farms in where I've grown up. I would say probably 4,000 to 5,000 total acres since I've started hunting that have been lost to non-resident landowners. And so then instantly that gets displaced. Everybody on those farms gets displaced, and now they have to go find another place to hunt, right? And typically, even with a resident landowner coming in, unless they're from out of county, let's say someone in a bigger, like Des Moines, buys a farm just to hunt, then typically there's going to be some displacement there as well. But for the most part, if it's another local who's buying the land, then I will still have my hunting opportunities there. Not a lot changes with that. That's just my examples that I've lived through.
Well, I can tell you that's probably because you live in Iowa and I live in Minnesota, and I've lost plenty of hunting opportunities and they've all been to residents because nobody's paying to come in there to hunt.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. Okay, so that happens to you and it's non-residents. Happens to me and it's residents. Happens to some dude in Pennsylvania. Who cares? The net result is fewer places to go roam, fewer places to hunt, and we need to address that. And it sucks, but we still have some opportunities now, and you better take advantage of them. If you're listening to this and you're like, man, these guys are all doom and gloom and they're pissed off, there's still opportunities out there. There's still places to go. We still have some fight left in us. And there's still some really, really cool places to travel that are going to sell you a tag, or you can play the points game for a little bit. And I don't want to discourage people from doing that, because I still think that the experience is worth it, and the opportunity, if it's there, you should take advantage of it. Now, you said you're going to Nebraska this year?
I'm 100% sure where I'm going.
Okay.
I know I'm going to go to South Dakota, given the rules and regulations don't change too much. All right. Like, I love South Dakota. I also am going to apply for Kansas. So my uncle, he lives in Kansas, and he's probably going to help me out finding a place to hunt down. And Kansas is the number one state for the least amount of public ground in the entire country, I believe. Iowa is second and Kansas is first. And so I might be hunting some public there. I might be hunting some private through my uncle. He lives down there. And so I'm going to try to hunt Kansas. If I hunt Kansas, I'll probably take the extra miles and also hunt Oklahoma. And so just because of how close they are to each other. Mm-hmm. So Kansas and Oklahoma and Iowa. If I don't draw Kansas, then what I'll do is I'll probably do Iowa and South Dakota for sure. I had a pretty tough go of things in my September hunt in Nebraska, so I don't know. I'm still debating on if I'm going to go there, and that's that Oklahoma and Nebraska are both over the counter as of right now.
If you go hunt Kansas and you get on some land that your uncle is going to put you on, are you going to make sure you don't displace any residents?
Yeah, that's a fair smart ass question. And I will say that I will not be displacing any. They will just be adding a hunter to that farm. Okay.
I'm just giving you shit, buddy. All right. So
I know.
That's pretty ambitious, right? But I guess that is it. The way that you describe the potential plans for your fall is sort of a good counterweight to all the bitching we did for the first 20 minutes of this podcast, saying we're losing opportunities, because you're going, hey, if I draw South Dakota, I'll hunt there because I love it. If I might go to Nebraska, even though Nebraska can kick my ass sometimes, I still love it. And I know that I might draw Kansas, and I'm going to be able to buy an over-the-counter tag in Oklahoma. That's solid. Like, it's good to hear that. Why those states? Like, let's start right up on the top with South Dakota. Why start there?
So the first time I ever went to South Dakota, I instantly fell in love with it. Less about the hunting and more about the landscape. Like, our buddy Mark Kenyon talks about the West, and he talks about the mountains. Like, he's a mountain guy. He wants to be out in the mountain. Dude, I'm a prairie guy. Like, there's something about the Badlands. There's something about the wide open prairie where you can get on a point and see until you can't see anymore, until everything fades away.
Yep.
I love that feeling. I love the feeling of feeling extremely small in a large area. And so that's why I go hunt in South Dakota. And it gives me the opportunity to hunt multi-species. My tag allows me to hunt mule deer and or whitetail. And so those are the biggest contributing factors.
Yeah. So you mentioned multiple times, everybody who listens to this knows you're an Iowa resident. You live in the best state to hunt whitetails. And yet you're saying, because this is something that happens a lot. And this is one of the issues you guys are dealing with down there in Iowa, is like, everybody wants to go there to kill a big buck.
Right.
That's, Kansas, same way, Illinois was, Buffalo County, all that bullshit. But you're saying, and this is a point that we can't stress enough, is I live in Iowa, I have awesome hunting. I'm going to leave Iowa to go hunt South Dakota, not because I want to kill 170s, but because I want to hunt in an environment that speaks to me.
Yes.
That matters so much. We frame these traveling hunts so much around just the kill or the trophy potential. But when you start doing this, I feel the same way about the Badlands. Like, man, I don't know what it is, but it's awesome. I don't know why. It's the same thing. And, like when I hunt Western North Dakota, that environment is just special to me. Like, I want to spend time there. And when you start doing these hunts, it's easy to plan around. Like, well, I want to draw my Kansas tag because Kansas has giants. It's like, okay, sure, sort of. But where do you want to go experience a hunt?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of ground speaks to you? And that's such an important consideration that we kind of don't give a lot of weight to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just a successful day out there is sitting at the top of the highest point and just spotting all day. Like even if I make a stock or not, going back, sleeping in the back of my truck, cooking all my food on my tailgate, or pitching a tent somewhere, 2 miles in. It's something that I just can't get enough of.
Yeah, it's really fun to get outside your comfort zone.
Yes.
It's different. It's weird to travel to hunt the exact same stuff you can travel at home. It's fun to have some variety. All right. So South Dakota is an easy one because South Dakota is cool, man. That state offers so many interesting, just different regions and different kinds of habitats. Like you said, the mule deer, the whitetail thing, you can go pick up an antelope tag out there. It's pretty cool. What about Nebraska?
Yeah. Nebraska, in the area of Nebraska that I hunt, it's a lot like South Dakota. All right. So a lot of people drive through Nebraska and all they see is flat cattle pasture. Well, if you get into the northwest corner of Nebraska, there's a ton of terrain change. And I mean, it can get pretty gnarly back in there. I mean, there's where I hunt in Nebraska, there is wintering elk in that same public that I hunt. So and even further west, they have bighorn sheep in Nebraska as well. And in South Dakota, they have bighorn sheep that I've seen in some of these spots. And so it's just a continuation of South Dakota. I wanted more of it. And so I said, hey, I might as well get a tag and go do Western Nebraska too.
Yeah. That Nebraska has some really, really cool opportunities, and things are getting a little tighter there. And I get it, Nebraska for a while was like the biggest sleeper state, and it got really busy. But, Nebraska also promoted the shit out of their non-resident hunting opportunities and really pushed hard to compete with South Dakota and a couple other states. And now it's kind of, there's a course correction going on there, but there's still some really badass opportunities out there. And I will say this, that northwestern corner of Nebraska that everybody wants to head to is pretty badass. Like it's
badass, but I will be the first to let you know there's a lot of other hunters out there.
It's a magnet for hunting pressure. And if you drive through Nebraska, you're driving by a lot of pretty good hunting opportunities to get to that corner of the state. So I would say don't be afraid to check out some other parts of Nebraska. All right. So those are two options. And you said Kansas. Have you hunted Kansas before?
I have not hunted Kansas. I've been in a tree stand in Kansas with my uncle, but never hunted. I do want to add something here though. I have been collecting preference points in Wyoming for 8 years now. So this July, when I purchase my preference point, I will have like 8 preference points for elk, 8 preference points for antelope, and like 6 preference points for deer, I believe. And so while I'm doing these other things, I'm also planning and calculating for a really big once in a lifetime hunt where I'll probably try to schedule 2 weeks out there to go try to chase elk or some of these other species. So it's just one of these things. And that's why I personally kind of like the preference point system, because you're waiting in line while you're also hunting other places. And the more you wait in line, and it's not necessarily true. This next statement isn't necessarily true all of the times, but most of the time, the more preference points that you have, the better unit you can get into, has a little bit more access, has less hunters in it, and it just gives you an opportunity to do something really special.
Yeah. I'm kind of agnostic on the preference point thing. I've got the same deal going on in Wyoming, but I have quite a few more points than you do. But I look at it, as long as they don't change the rules halfway through, which you see some states do that. So you've bought into the promise of this kind of system, And then when they change it and you're already, 8 points deep, that sucks. The other thing I would say on that is anybody listening to this who's like, oh man, I'm going to go buy Wyoming points. And then they're going to get there and they're going to go, oh my God, I could draw a bighorn sheep or a moose tag or, this premier elk unit. Do some research before you start buying in on preference points, because people starting today in some of these really once in a lifetime type animals, you're never going to draw. Like you look at how many people are ahead of you and look at what it takes to draw now, if it's 20 or 22 points or whatever it is, and they're given 3 tags a year in this unit. Like some of these situations you'll never get into. And so just pay attention to that. There are some opportunities out there to buy some points and get into some, you're probably going to need them for general units here, or you might already, I'm not sure. But just pay attention to that. I mean, that is one thing I like about Iowa is every May I can buy my point and I can look at what it took to draw each zone in Iowa. And I go, okay, I should theoretically be able to hunt here in 2 years or 3 years. And you can plan around that. And honestly, this is where everything's going. And it's not going to just be a non-resident game. In 10 years, 12, 15 years, people are going to be playing the points game in their home state too, I think. Like, I think this is just coming as, we have more people on the landscape and fewer places to hunt. So learning about it is not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. God forbid it ever gets to that, but I don't disagree that something like some big changes to some of these states are coming. Well,
I mean, it's coming. I mean, these state game agencies are going to have to generate revenue. And if we haven't really seen the price situation, even as crazy as it has gotten, we haven't seen that, people go, I'm not going to buy them. I'm not going to play the game. But theoretically, you just think it would happen eventually. And you look at the resource management, and I just think it's coming at some point. I know a lot of people probably don't, but I think the face of this world is going to change a lot in the next 10 years. And it's not going to get easier for anyone. You think about, you look at Colorado right now and you can go buy an over-the-counter elk tag. At least you could, that's probably going to change too. And the residents are going to cheer that. But, wolves come in, CWD hits hard, whatever, bad winters. And all of a sudden your elk herd is 50% of what it was. That could happen. And then what? And then it's like, okay, well, we're not going to let everybody go buy a license and go hunt these because this is a resource we have to manage. So now you're going to have to play this game. And that's a pure hypothetical, but I just kind of think that's coming to a lot of states eventually.
Yeah, I agree.
So, all right. So Kansas is an interesting one. I've only hunted there one time, and I had arguably maybe the most amazing morning of my life with buck activity. It was pretty crazy, but Kansas is a weird one for non-residents to go to because I think some people kind of underestimate how prevalent baiting is on private land and how that can affect things. And, like you mentioned, it's not like a state that's overrun with public land. It's an interesting opportunity because there's big deer there, but it's not. So sometimes I think it's not what people expect.
Right. I would say that my interest in Kansas is two things. One, my uncle lives there, and he is somewhat responsible for me getting into the outdoors, right? He took me pheasant hunting when I was a whippersnapper, and so that's a big one. But second is how some people think of Iowa. I mean, I live in Iowa, so I get to see Iowa for its true beauty. But my daydream state, like some people daydream about Iowa, my daydream state is Kansas. And so when I think about, hey, an opportunity outside of Iowa to run into a big buck, that's where my mind goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, understandably so. Kansas has plenty to offer. What about Oklahoma? Why Oklahoma?
So Oklahoma is one of those things where, man, I really like. Once you start saying something is a sleeper state, or something is good. And I got a buddy on the network here that every time I say the word Oklahoma, I get a text from him. And he's like, dude, shut up. Just like stop talking about it, man. And so I really do think from a public land standpoint, Oklahoma has a lot to offer. I mean, shit, a couple years ago, Oklahoma had the most 200-inch deer come out of it in 1 year, that more than Nebraska or more than Iowa, more than Illinois, more than Kansas. So we have this opportunity not only for just good deer hunting, but potentially great deer hunting in that state. And so why I'm interested in Oklahoma is because of the proximity to Kansas. And so it's an opportunity to just hit two places at one time.
Yep. Have you hunted Oklahoma?
Not yet. No.
Are you planning to hunt public land?
Yes.
I've hunted Oklahoma a couple times. It's one of my favorite states as far as just high deer density. Like I've hunted a couple different regions in that state that are pretty far apart, and there's just a lot of deer down there. The public land's pretty decent. One thing I will say about Oklahoma is it feels to me sort of like when I hunt Wisconsin. Like it's like, man, everybody hunts. You know what I mean? Like there's just like a high proportion of the state that hunts, but also I've never had a bad interaction down there. Like every resident I've met down there that was out hunting where we were hunting has been awesome. And I know that's like a really small sample size, but it's just a cool state. It's cool opportunities. Right. Over the counter for now, you get a whole bunch of tags. I think there's talk of maybe limiting buck tags down there eventually, which kind of makes sense. But whatever. But it's a cool opportunity, and like you said, you can hunt, northern Oklahoma and be damn near hunting Kansas type deer in a different situation, or you can hunt out western Oklahoma. That's where I hunted the first time in kind of southwestern Oklahoma. And man, it was almost like a Texas hunt, kind of with the terrain and totally different. And then I hunted southern Oklahoma one time real close to Texas, and it was like a pure Texas hunt with fire ants and everything. So it's pretty wild down there. Yeah.
And on top of Oklahoma, this is another couple things that I've really been thinking about lately. And it just, I don't know why it didn't hit me sooner, but I have Iowa. I live in the eastern part of the state. I'm 3 hours from Minnesota. I'm an hour and a half from 2 hours from Wisconsin, and I'm 45 minutes to an hour from Illinois. And I've never taken an opportunity to hunt any of those states, and they're right next door. And so I just have this feeling that if I go east, I just run into more and more people. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to start putting as my kids get into more activities and as life just eventually gets busier and busier, I think I'm going to find myself looking into Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois a lot more.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and Missouri, for Missouri as well.
Yeah. One thing to consider there too, because this is, again, kind of back to we kind of start our planning or our daydreaming on this around where can we go kill a big one. But if you take Iowa, for example, and you have your October 1 opener, so many states that are close to you will let you hunt for 2 weeks or more before that.
Right.
And that's something, like one of the main reasons I started traveling to hunt, in Minnesota this year, our gun season starts on November 4th. So if I want to bow hunt the rut, I got to leave.
Right.
And so it's like you sort of start planning around that too. So if you have an October opener, you might be able to get somewhere and have a couple weeks of hunting. Or, when your state's gun season opens, you might be able to skip across the border and go bow hunt somewhere else. Like there's a lot of reasons to go. Or like you said, if you're taking your kids and you want them to experience a cool trip where you're camping and doing stuff, but you don't want to drive them, 12, 14 hours out west, there's things to do. There's opportunities out there for the whitetail hunter with a little bit of ambition who can afford it.
Yeah. Yep. It's the whitetail, but I have a bucket list. and I have it written down. Let's see, where's it at? Oh, it's right here on my desk. And so I was looking into a couple of these hunts, and I'm just like, I'm going to have to save a lot of money in order to even get close to some of these animals. But elk and mule deer, like I still have not killed a mule deer, and I really want to kill a mule deer. I kill an elk. I want to kill a pronghorn. I think those three animals I feel like I'm going to be able to accomplish that fairly, I'm not going to say easily, but I should be able to accomplish them from a financial standpoint with not a lot of effort. And I'm not looking for giants, right?
Yep.
But I'm just looking for a cool opportunity. Those three animals. I have two more animals that I want to kill. One is a moose, and I want it to be a certain way. Like I want to get on a boat. I want to take a plane into the middle of nowhere. I want to get on a boat, and I want to float down a river, and I want to stop. I want to call moose, and I want that, I want that experience. Like I saw it on TV when I was a kid. I was like, I want that experience. That's a once in a lifetime deal, right? Then I want a caribou. And really, if I kill those 5 animals, I'm going to be happy with my life as a hunter. All of my bucket list animals and experiences at that point have been met. And then maybe from there, I'll go on and do some other different things. But those last 2 are going to be expensive. And I don't mean from necessarily just, if I could go into Alaska and go on public and go do that thing and do it cheap, but still from Iowa to Alaska is a big trip, right?
Well, there's no saying that going to Alaska and doing it is going to be cheap in any way.
Exactly. And so those 2 things take a little bit more planning and preparation, and a little bit more in the savings account, in the hunting account, I guess I'll say. And then just realize that a couple of those trips are going to be once in a lifetime. So I want to make it count,
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too, right? Like if you're sitting there listening to this and you're like, oh man, it's hard for me to even conceive of making a over the road whitetail trip happen, but you're sitting there daydreaming about some of these Western critters, man, the only way to get there is just to start learning how to do this stuff, Right. And it goes, we talk a lot about, figuring out how to get tags and play the points game and buy your license or whatever, but it's also how sharp are your e-scouting skills? Like how comfortable are you driving quite a ways away from home and camping and hunting out of a camp, if that's what you're going to do? Those things, once you start, I started doing that with turkeys when I was in high school, just cause that was the thing that we could afford to go travel to hunt. And you just realize like how many holes you have in your game, but you also start building some confidence in that kind of thing. And it takes time, like a lot of people go, I'm going to go do that elk hunt first. It's like, okay, right. Great. But that's an expensive prop, even for a DIY over the counter deal is not really very cheap. And then you've got, the added stress of like, that's a big, like a big license to buy, and you tell everybody you're going to go and you got to get in shape. And then you get out there and you're like, all your e-scouting is kind of like, oh, I found some meadows. I found a water hole or watering hole. Like, yeah, so did everybody else. Now what?
Yep.
It's running through this stuff and getting used to it a little closer to home on like a little bit less stressful type of hunt, like a whitetail hunt, is really beneficial and still a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing about collecting information, e-scouting is great. Here's what my first 2 years, my first year in Nebraska, my first year in South Dakota, I drove or walked by everybody I saw. If I saw someone, I just kept moving. If there was somebody on the road, I just kept moving. And I didn't want to tell them what I was about. They didn't want to tell me what they're about. That's what I thought. Man, I couldn't have been more wrong. Now I talk to absolutely everybody I see, because most of the time people will drop some kind of information. And so a perfect example of this is I ran out to some antelope hunters when I was in Nebraska. And I said, I just started talking with them. We sparked up a conversation, and they're out there for they're out there for antelope. I'm out there for deer. And I said, hey man, I saw some antelope over here. And they're like, hey dude, I saw a really big buck over here. And so we shared information, and it really didn't affect us. Right. And so, man, it's just one way to continue to gather information out there is to be like friendly and talk to people. Man, I talk to landowners. Now, where I was hunting in South Dakota was like the worst experiences I've ever had in talking with people in certain parts of South Dakota. But in Nebraska, man, I was talking every guy I ran into, landowner, cattle operation, other hunters, man, everybody's willing to share information. And I think that's really a cool thing about hunting out of state.
A lot of people who are like, hey, I want to go to Oklahoma and hunt public land too, or I want to go somewhere in the Midwest because I live out east and I want to go hunt those dumb corn-fed deer. They'll jump on a forum, Bow Site or Rock Slide or whatever, and hey, I'm thinking about going to North Dakota or Nebraska or whatever, and I want to hunt public land. Anybody have any suggestions? You're gonna get the worst, most bullshit information often.
Don't do it.
Because, first off, there are a lot of people who don't want you there. So they're going to just lie to you, whatever. These are strangers. They don't care about you. Secondly, they might not have a clue what they're talking about. And the same thing happens if you talk to people in person sometimes, where you have to just think like, what does this person actually know? I can't tell you how many times I've seen something on a forum where it's like, don't come to Nebraska because our gun season's in the middle of the rut and the rifle hunters shoot all of the deer when they're 2.5. You're never going to kill a big one on public land. And it's like, okay, like you have places where there's 90,000 acres of public land in one spot. There aren't any big bucks in there. Like, you don't think so? And so I just say, take it with a grain of salt and understand just like generally what you're getting into to go to a spot, like not necessarily maybe trophy quality, but like the deer density situation to some extent, the pressure situation to some extent, and just understand like you can forge your own path. And most of the people, if you're willing to go travel and hunt and do the work, you're probably going to out hunt most of the people you could get information from. Like that's just generally true. So just got to go like forge your own path and really not listen to or not pay attention to a lot of the information you might be able to kind of gather up, because it might not mean anything to you, and it might actually hurt, mentally to take that in and go, oh man, what if these guys are right about the deer quality, or EHD killed them all here or whatever. Like, man, there's a lot of BS out there.
Right. And you got to use your best judgment to weed that out.
Yep. Well, and you got to think too, this is partially, like we said, to just go experience a new place. Right. Like it's just partially to go have an experience somewhere else. And so if you're placing a little bit too much value on whether there's 140 inches all over, you're kind of missing the point. And if you're traveling to hunt like that, and especially if you're going to go hunt public land, there's probably deer there that you'd be really happy with, like generally no matter where you're going to go. And I know people say, oh yeah, come to my state and hunt the public land. I'm like, there's good deer in a lot of places. Now I'm not talking 170s, Absolutely. But I'm talking deer that if you're on a 5-day public land hunt and it walks by, you're going to shoot it and be real happy. And so
I'm not expecting. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not expecting to shoot Iowa quality deer when I go to Western Nebraska or when I go to maybe Oklahoma. I'm not expecting that. There's a sliding scale with everywhere I go. And I'll be honest, I haven't shot a lot of deer out of state yet. And so the deer that I did shoot in South Dakota, man, I look at it every day and I'm so jacked about that hunt. I relive it every day. And so it's less about quality of deer and just keep coming back to the word experience, man.
Yep. Well, yeah, and I mean, this is something I don't know if people actually listen to me on it or not, but like you talked about how you still want to go, you want to get an elk, you want to get a mule deer, you want to get an antelope, and I look at those opportunities the same way I look at traveling for whitetails in most situations. I'm like, man, low standards are your friend. Like if you go hunt, Oklahoma whitetails, and you grew up in Michigan or you grew up in Ohio or whatever, that's a different world, a different thing. I mean, judging those deer is so different. They're a lot smaller, especially in certain parts of. It's just you're into it for a whole different experience. And if you bring your home standards to out-of-state hunts, it's sort of a recipe for disaster most of the time. And this is true on whitetails. This is really true if you start to go hunt elk and mule deer and antelope, and you're pounding away on public land on easy to get tags. Listen, like it is not easy if you're a tree stand hunter to go out and spot and stalk antelope. Trust me. Like if you go and you're like, well, it's got to be 70 inches plus, like good luck. Like you're gonna eat that tag. Like you just probably are. Whether even if you're sitting in a blind on a water hole all day, which looks real easy on TV, it's just a different kind of deal. And you got to understand that you're getting into this for different reasons.
Yeah, that's fact. That's a fact, my friend.
All right, so let's run through this hypothetical here. All of your plans fall through, and you're like, I guess I got to go hunt Oklahoma public land. Where do you start then? Wait, it's like hunt timing wise. What do you factor in there? What do you start, doing e-scouting wise? Like how do you build the foundation of that hunt?
All right, so the foundation of that hunt is this. First things first, I'm looking at when the rifle season starts up in that state. And I think Oklahoma starts on like the 10th of November or something like that. And so that tells me I don't want to be in a bow hunting scenario when the gun season's going around. I want to be as close to the rut as humanly possible, knowing that I have Iowa to hunt as well. And I want to be there for, the best time in Iowa. And so I also have to know that from a family standpoint, I can't just be gone for 1 month straight throughout the year, going from South Dakota to Nebraska to Iowa to Oklahoma, right? So if I'm going to probably go in a pre-rut time frame, I'll probably stay as late into October as possible. And so that's my time frame. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so outside of that, then it just becomes e-scouting on Hunt Stand or whatever other, like Onyx or whatever other app you use, Google Maps, Google Earth. I'm looking at everything, and I'm scouring everything. I get my leads just like other people do. I talk with buddies, and I say, hey man, talk to me a little bit about what you felt about this area, or I just gather information that way. And that could potentially lead me into at least a starting point. And at that starting point, then I'm looking for access routes. Then I'm looking for edge. Then I'm looking for cover. Then I'm looking at satellite imagery. I'm looking at topo. I'm looking at water. I'm looking for potential food sources. All the things that I do here, but I'm just doing it on an app or computer there. And so that really is the foundation. And then that way I have a starting point. And then from there, if that starting point sucks, then I start to get real mobile, and then I go figure out stuff on the fly.
Yep. Well, I want to talk about that because, and I'll use Oklahoma as an example again here, just to further piss off your buddy on the network.
Yep.
When I hunted down there the first time, I hunted on their October 1 opener. So I was down there for 6-7 days camping on the opener, and my plan going into that, I'm going to Southwest Oklahoma on October 1. It's going to be 1,000,000 degrees. I'm going to find every pond I can that's tucked as far back in as I can, and I'm going to build an entire plan around water. And then I drive 14 hours out there, and it rains for 6 days. Miserable. And immediately negates 99% of the e-scouting I did because I got married to an idea and I got too cocky.
Yep.
And that happens a lot. And so when you think about this, like what you're talking about is like, I'm looking for this feature, that feature, these features, all of this stuff. What you're doing is saying, I'm building plan A through Z because I don't know what's coming for me when I get there.
Right.
And so when you're listening to this, think about that for your e-scouting. You're like, oh, I'm going to go during the rut to this state. So I'm only going to find, the best, most badass looking terrain traps and funnels and whatever out there. And then you get there and it's one of those ruts where it's 80 degrees in the day and the nonstop chasing that you were counting on isn't happening. What's your fallback? Right. Like, or the other thing that I would say on this note is, let's say, you talked about how you want to plan your timing around being home for the best hunting during the rut in Iowa. Absolutely makes sense, right? Now, what if I draw Iowa and I go, man, I can't wait to go hunt that Iowa rut, but I'm on public land in a place where there isn't very much public land. Now, my plan might look a lot different than yours because you might be going into a situation where you're like, I'm not dealing with public land pressure, but I could be if I planned it around that. So I show up, not only is it me and every other non-resident there who wants that Iowa rut, but all the residents are like, hell yeah, we're getting out into the woods now. So you have to think about that stuff when you're looking at this. It's not just like, how can I preserve my best hunting at home while still having this cool experience over the road? Like, what are you going to deal with? And you mentioned, the gun seasons or something like that. Like when you plan this stuff, man, there's youth seasons out there. There's early antlerless seasons that, you won't have them in your state the same way. And then you travel somewhere and it's like, okay, now you got to wear blaze orange, or now you can't shoot bucks for 4 days, or now you can't hunt state-owned public land. All of that research, you got to do that stuff ahead of time so you don't get surprised when you get out there.
Yeah. Or there's antelope hunters or pheasant hunters or small game hunters or coyote hunters doing the exact same thing that you're trying to do, but they're doing it louder and they're doing, you know what I mean? Like, I can just remember when I got bit by that dog, I had put all this time into this one particular piece, scouting it. And I go, dude, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get back there. It's going to be money. And it was good. But the first sit, I'm sitting there with a spotting scope, waiting for all these deer to come off private, back down into the bedding. And that morning, here comes this Cocker Spaniel or whatever he was, just jumping into the weeds and busting pheasants out, busting deer out left and right. And it took a day or two for that for that area to recover. And so that's one thing that you got to think about too, is like, okay, I'm traveling. Is there any other seasons for any other game open as well? Because that can have an impact as well.
Big time. That's a good point. That's especially concerning if you travel to a state like South Dakota, where the pheasant opener is like a religious experience. Like, right. It's a different level. And, or you can see this, we dealt with this in North Dakota a lot, where the archery opener would coincide with the resident once in a lifetime elk hunt. Or some people could draw that tag. So what you ended up with was people who were only going to draw that tag once in their lifetime, and everybody's uncle and brother and cousin comes along to help them scout and glass, and they're pushing, and even though you're like, oh, it shouldn't be that busy because they're only selling this many tags to hunters like me. If you don't know what else is going on there, you can be in for a real surprise. And I would say on top of that, one of the things, like when you're talking about, you're like, this is my spot. I'm watching it. The deer are here. This is going to happen. And then something like that happens where a pheasant hunter comes through or whatever. If you don't have that backup built into your plan ahead of time, there's lost time right there. Like there's a mental aspect of it that sucks, and there's just a logistical aspect of like, now what do I do? And I've told this on here a whole bunch of times, but I'll tell it again quick. The last time I went to Oklahoma, I put all my money on red, man. I was like, this spot I'm going to is several thousand acres. It's gonna be all I need. And I drove all the way down there with a buddy of mine, and we set up camp and started looking for deer, and it was a ghost town. I mean, it was brutal, and I didn't have a backup. And so I'm sitting there in this kind of like isolated region going, this isn't going to happen here. And we're halfway through our hunt. And so we started looking for new places to go and called an audible and drove 4 hours to a totally different area. And we got lucky. We ended up killing some deer there, and it ended up being pretty good, but that was lucky. Like you don't want to get into a situation where you're like, this is it. I'm camping here. I'm hunting here. This is all I'm going to do, without at least considering where would you go if that place sucks for some reason.
Right. And there's one more trend I really want to mention here is a lot of people try to hit openers. So South Dakota has the non-resident opener, or certain states have the residents can hunt before that, but non-residents can't hunt until a certain date on a couple of these states.
Yep.
And so what we do then is we go in there, and I just wait for that mass. The first year I went, it was okay, but I was running into a lot of other hunters. You let some of those dates slide a week, or you go before a certain holiday or after a certain holiday, then it opens up, because what hunters are almost like animals. We tend to do the same thing over and over again. Humans do that as well. And so if you can find your niche outside of the trends that other hunters are using, I feel that just gives you a one-up compared to everybody else.
Big time. That's a really good point. I mean, we saw that with a couple of the Dakotas and a couple of Western states and Kentucky when the velvet thing got really hot, and everybody wanted their velvet buck, and you go hunt those states on the opener, which is typically going to be like a September 1 deal. And it's like overrun with people, but you go back 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, and you can have the place to yourself. And that's something, I mentioned that with Iowa and the planning down there. And, I'm going to apply again down there now, because I have enough points where I might be able to get into that unit I hunted the last time. And I'll probably go in mid-October for the majority of my hunt, because I'm hunting public land, and I know the opener will have a bunch of people out, just because it will. And I know the rut will have a bunch of people out. And if I want to catch deer and kind of work against the deer and not have to worry about tons of competition, there's going to be a window there in October where people just they take their foot off the gas a little bit. And you see that. I see that in northern Wisconsin, where I hunt a lot too. My best hunts on public land there are always during the lull, just because people aren't out there. So I know it sucks to plan a kind of an expensive hunt that you got to take some PTO for and whatever, and then be like, man, I don't really want to go hunt the second week of October. But it's like, well, I mean, you kind of got to make an educated guess what you're going to get into pressure wise.
Yeah. And so I can say this for many, and I know for archers or bow hunters, you're up against your state's gun season, right? And sometimes that comes in early November, and sometimes, luckily for Iowa, it doesn't even happen until December. So, but one thing that I've noticed is people will blow their load real easy, real fast, and then they'll leave. Okay. So November 1st hits in Iowa, the next 5 to 7 days are crazy. Everybody comes the first week. Even the resident hunters, first week. Dude, if people are more patient, they let some of this slide, let everybody else blow their load, then you come in and I feel like you'll have, the woods would be empty on certain times.
Yep. And that's a good point too. And I'm starting to, I don't know, maybe this is just because I've spent so much time on public land, but I'm starting to think the second and third week of November generally are maybe a better time to kill a big one than that first week.
Absolutely. And I'll say this, trail camera data for me proves that. Now, I'm also in this category where I want to hop in and I want to strike while the iron is hot on a local deer. And this is when I have tons of information available. But one thing that I've noticed in some of these closer to home whitetail states that I've hunted is once you get past peak breeding, then things open up, and then trail camera data indicates tons of deer that I've never seen before cruising through. And that is when I have my trail camera pictures of my biggest bucks ever.
Yep. Yeah, I've noticed that up in Wisconsin where I hunt too. If I leave a camera up, one of my properties, it's wild. And it's not like a ton of consistent movement, but the deer that show up are real interesting to me.
Right.
And it's,
right.
It's not like, it's not even up there. It's not even one a day for sure. But in that week or two, it'll be a couple where you're just like, man, I wish I had been there. Like enough to get you to go spend all day sits there on the off chance that today is the day.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. What else? You sleep in your truck a lot when you go on these trips. Why?
Number one, money, right? I mean, a hotel room, even off season in some of these states, they're pretty cheap, but my truck is $0 a night.
Yep. And
so I have just found a real comfortable air mattress. I've found a comfortable, pads, and I can get really comfortable in the back of my truck. I got a really good sleeping bag. This year, I upgraded my sleeping bag, and it was crazy expensive, but still, it's cheaper than sleeping in a hotel room.
How expensive?
I bought a Western Mountaineering bag, made in America. I think it was $685.
Okay, so real expensive for a sleeping bag.
Yeah, but that replaced the cost that prevented me from having to get a hotel room. Very comfortable in the back of my bed, and I'm spending less on gas money because I'm sleeping on the road, or on some of these states you can park on the public and you can stay there overnight. And so that's what I'm doing, and it's less travel. I get more sleep because I'm not driving to and from a hotel room, and I pop up, all my stuff's ready, get and go, and then come back, eat supper, go to bed. And so I'm getting more sleep. I'm spending less energy. I'm spending less on gas. I'm spending less on hotel rooms. And I pack a cooler full of all my food, and I'm good to go, man. I mean, I can get out there for 7 days if I wanted to.
Yeah. There's a good way to look at that, or these trips, is the more money you can spend before you go, the more you'll save when you do go. Because if you plan your food out, and the lodging is a huge one, and staying in a hotel, I'm so biased against that for bow hunts or big game hunts. I just not only because it is expensive, but it's just a pain in the ass. Like getting driving to wherever you're going to hunt, like you're talking about, as opposed to being set up there. There's a lot of reasons that camping is better. And on top of that, a lot of the places you want to deer hunt, there's not going to be a place to stay all that close, Right. And so that might influence, where you go, and just getting, so I know people are going to listen to that and go, it's crazy that you spent that much money on a sleeping bag. And it's like, yeah, that's a lot of money, but that's a buy once, cry once situation that you use out west, and you'll use it for years. Or you could take $685 or whatever it is and buy, like I'm using a wall tent. It's kind of like I guess I don't know how many people it's supposed to hold, but it's a White Duck Outdoors wall tent. And that thing I think it was $700. So like similar in price to that sleeping bag, but I can set it up by myself, have an entire cook station, have an awesome place to sleep, dry out my clothes, everything. And it's built like a freaking tank. Like it's going to last me years. And so you think about that and go, yeah, okay, well, $700 to drop on a piece of camping equipment is a lot. Man, you can spend $700 at hotels real fast, and then drive into the burger joint or wherever to get your food. All of that stuff adds up so much compared to eating some sandwiches or whatever back at camp. And so a lot of times when people say, like, I could never afford to do this, I'm like, I don't know, maybe, right? Maybe, like, everybody's situation is different, but there are ways where you can do some of this stuff, and you don't need a $700 sleeping bag, but having good camping gear is real freaking nice for this stuff. And so there's certain pieces that really seem to matter and some that just don't. But overall, you know, like you're kind of making an investment into a whole bunch of good experiences and you're saving money other ways. And so it's worth it to plan that stuff out and understand what you're going to get into.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. Even this year. So to piggyback off what you just said, from a cost standpoint, that $685 sleeping bag allowed me to save, I want to say $1,000 to $1,500 over Nebraska and South Dakota on hotel rooms. And when I was in South Dakota, I only stayed in a hotel room one night because the temperature dropped to like 5. And I'm just like, I'm closer to I'll put in the 30 minutes drive in the morning just so I can shower, just so I'm not like frigid cold. And I just refreshed. And that was that last day of the hunt on my way back to Iowa.
Yep.
I also like to use hotels as backups. We got caught in a rainstorm in Nebraska 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. And it came out of nowhere. We weren't prepared. We got drenched. So we went to a hotel and we took a shower. We dried all of our clothes out, and it was good to have that as a backup.
Yeah.
Because from a convenient standpoint, trying to air dry wet clothes sucks if you don't have a dryer, right? And so, but on top of that, man, it's one of those things like I just love the silence. I love looking up at the stars. I love everything about that minimalistic approach to an out-of-state hunt.
Me too. And I honestly think, I mean, this might sound crazy, but I honestly feel like I sleep better and have a better hunt when I'm, you know, because you get back and whatever time it's dark, you know, 6:30, 7 o'clock, you make some food, and then it's like, there's nothing to do. It's not like you're in a hotel watching TV and BSing with your buddies or whatever. It's like, well, I might as well go to bed because I got to get up at, 4:30 tomorrow morning or whatever. And I feel like you get into, it's a little bit easier to just like get into the rhythm of the hunt when you're already there and you're in camp and your pack's next to you and you get it ready that night and you wake up in the morning and make your coffee and oatmeal and whatever and you go. And it's just like fewer things to go wrong, fewer things to distract you. Just it's a really good move. And I know people are interested in camping on these hunts, and it just takes a lot of planning. Like I just say that, like, you got to know where you can camp. Like, is there a campground close by, or are you on that public that you can just dump a tent down and go? Understand that before you go. Again, the work ahead of time pays off once you get out there, because then it's just like, I know what's legal, I know what to do, I know where I'm going, and if this doesn't work out, I know I can pull up my camp quick and go 40 miles down the road and restart the process. And the more that you just handle those details ahead of time, the better these trips go.
Yep, absolutely.
Man, it's actually making me really want to go camp and hunt right now. And I kind of have been not like super stoked for that over the last few years because I did it so much for so long. But when you have your system down and you've got some good plans in place to go hunt here or there, it gets pretty exciting. And I think we should maybe wrap up on this. That's one of the things, like, we don't talk about. Back in the end of January, 2 buddies and I went down to Florida for 4 days and fished. We've never done a fishing trip like that. We drive here and fish, whatever, but never like we're going to a destination. We're going to fish saltwater. And one of the things that was so fun about it was just planning it and like talking about what are we going to buy for lures? What are we going to bring down there? You bringing a cast net? What are we doing? And that aspect of a trip, it's like way underrated. It's just fun to have something to look forward to. And that's why the timing of this podcast is good. Because when you're stuck in March and it sucks and we're still getting snowstorms and all this BS, it's fun to start thinking like, man, I'm going to make this hunt happen in 6 months or 7 months, whatever, and start it now. It gives you something to do toward the process, which is pretty fulfilling and can help you kill deer, half a year away.
Yeah. I agree, Tony. I'm looking forward to it as well. When are we going to go on a hunt together?
Well, maybe I'll go to Oklahoma with you. You need somebody to go along?
Yeah, let's do it. I don't care. I mean, I'm literally right on the way for you to come down, right? You're southwest Minnesota though, right?
No. I'm up north of the cities.
Okay. Anyway, you just take the same highway. We'll meet in Des Moines and then we'll just go.
Yeah. I can get to Des Moines in about 3.5 hours. And I'm
Perfect.
pretty familiar with that route of getting down there. Yeah, man, that would be a blast. Dan, this is always so much fun to talk to you. Let everybody who's listening know where they can find your podcast and the 17,000 other podcasts that you're involved in.
My name is Dan Johnson. I was born in 1980. Nine Finger Chronicles, man. Just look it up. Nine Finger Chronicles podcast on the Sportsman's Empire Podcast Network. And we have, like Tony said, man, my podcast, the Hunting Gear podcast I also host, is one of 23 different RSS feeds on the Sportsman's Empire Podcast Network, all outdoor related, all hunting related, fishing, trapping. If you're an outdoorsman, you're going to love the content that we put out, man.
Ton of podcasts there under the network. And we should say this, if you don't mind listening to me talk and you like listening to Dan talk, we do podcasts together fairly often over there. And the wonderful thing about Dan's podcast is I can say a lot of the things on there that I can't say here because I don't want to get fired. So if you want to hear a little bit more of an uncensored version of these kind of podcasts, along with mostly zero talk about actual deer hunting and talk about Nintendo and 90s bands and all kinds of stuff, Dan's podcast is the way to go. Dan, thanks again, man. It's always a pleasure, buddy.
Appreciate it, Tony.
That's it for this week, folks. Be sure to tune in next week for some more whitetail goodness. This has been the Wired to Hunt podcast, and I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson. As always, thank you so much for listening. And if you're looking for more whitetail content, be sure to check out themeateater.com/wired to see a pile of new articles each week by Mark, myself, and a whole slew of whitetail addicts. Or head on over to the Wired to Hunt YouTube channel to view the weekly content we put up.